Hello chess friends and welcome to Yazardov's chess channel and welcome to the Altibox Norway Chess tournament in 2020. We are now already in the round 8 and today I decided to show you really a great gameplay by the world champion Magnus Carlsen against Aryan Tari. This game is really incredible as Magnus Carlsen in this game had no inaccuracies, no mistakes and no blunders. But the Stockfish engine evaluates the game by Magnus Carlsen as a perfect one. So here, pay good attention, Magnus played really such a great close Rui Lopez game, and although I'm really leaving you a little bit the result, but I don't think that the point of this game is to keep the result unrevealed, because I think we can always inform ourselves about the current standings of the tournament, who won the game. I think this game that Magnus Carlsen has played is really a great one, a great and instructive chess game, a great positional game, but also a great tactical game afterwards. So as I said, it was a perfect game played by the world champion. Let's check out now what happened, because I think for those who have troubles maybe to find good strategies in the Rui Lopez, it's really a great one. So e4 played by the world champion Magnus, e5 by Tari, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, so far the Rui Lopez. a6, we have bishop to a4 and now knight to f6. We have the Columbus variation and now Caslin played by Magnus Carlsen. Okay, there are now also opportunities to play knight to e4. It leads now into a complicated line in the game. Aryan Tari played here the close variation with the move bishop to e7. Magnus played the move d3, which is of course the normal idea, supporting our e4 pawn. In the game, Aryan Tari played b5, still common in theory, and that's the reason I always like to avoid the Rui Lopez from white's or for black's perspective, because there's simply, I think, too much book theory of the Rui Lopez. You can see really, I mentioned that many times before, you can really meet some lines in which you're maybe in move 30 and it's still common theory of the Rui Lopez. So that's why, as I said, I really like to avoid it, because it's simply too theoretical sometimes, the game. So that's why this game is also incredible play by Magnus. So bishop to b3, of course, retreating with the bishop and keeping the bishop on this very nice diagonal. We have d6, of course, still common theory, and now we have a4. This idea is very clear. We want to break the position on the queen side. Black has here built really this advanced pawn on b5, and one of the main ideas is to play something like rook to b8 or bishop to d7. In the game, bishop to d7 was played by Aryan Tari. The idea is, of course, to keep the connection between the queen and the rook, and Magnus played now c3. Okay, there is one good thing about this move on c3, but there is also bad thing about this move c3. First of all, the good part is, of course, that we are preparing a d4 pawn breakthrough. The bad part is that we have taken the natural square for our knight. The knight would of course be the best place here on the square c3, where we could control maybe further the d5 square. So that's why it's a flexible structure, of course, of the pawns. We want to create this d4 pawn breakthrough. It has, of course, to be prepared further with potential rook to e1 moves. We want to have also a protection of our e4 pawn, but also with bishop to c2, it's a possibility. So knight to a5 played by Aryan Tari, and we have now bishop to a2. Keeping here the bishop on the long diagonal. If you try b takes a4, it's okay, you have grabbed the pawn, and I've seen now, I think it was a Stockfish versus Lila C0 game from the TCE Season 19, in which Stockfish won the game in this particular position, where black simply took b takes a4 and white continued with the move knight from b to d2. But okay, it's still playable. What we have gained here from white's perspective as a compensation for the pawn is, of course, now a very nice pawn central control. So we have now deflected one pawn from the center, and now we can continue our breakthrough motif with the potential d4 move. And as I said, we don't have any more troubles, because the pawn is not on b5, the pawn is deflected simply to the edge of the board. So it's a common idea sometimes, as I said, to sacrifice the pawn to just get the pawn central control. So it's it can happen maybe in some Benko Gambit games, and also in maybe some Evans Gambit games. For instance, the Evans Gambit has a similar idea. We're getting rid of our pawn, and we get then suddenly a pawn central control. So bishop to a2 was played here c5, and now comes really the great part of this game, the great strategy that Magnus Carlsen has applied. What we can notice in this pawn structure here, as I said, our main disadvantage here from white perspective is the pawn on c3. So that's why we cannot play knight to c3, knight to d5. You see, that's why the c5 is possible so far, because the knight will never find a good way to get on this very nice square. It could maybe make something like knight to d2, maybe rook to f1 would be a path, maybe something like knight to d2, rook to e1, then knight to f1, knight to e3, and maybe then knight to d5. But if you notice, these are really too many tempos in order to get just maybe an advanced knight here on d5. Here Magnus Carlsen, after the move c5, he realized another great strategy here, and it's the bad bishop position. This bad bishop position, I think it's really one of the most natural ideas in chess that you can realize in your opponent's game, because here the bishop on e7, it's blocked out by its own pawns, and that's why we want to play simply against this bishop. This bishop is bad, and what we would love to do is maybe continue the game with the knight, for instance, a good knight, without any minor pieces on the board, without maybe even the queens, without the rooks on the board, and maybe cement the knight somehow on d5 and getting rid, as I said, of all of the minor pieces and force black to continue with the bad bishop on e7. So that's why Magnus played the move bishop to g5. Even if you get kicked away with potential h6 moves, you can still play bishop to f6. After bishop to f6, this bishop is still bad. It's blocked out again by its own pawn. So I wanted to pay good attention how Magnus does it now, because it's really a great one game. As I said, here Carlsen was played, and now we have knight to d2. Here rook to b8. And this was, of course, the clear idea now to get some kind of an attack here on the queen side with potential b4 pawn breakthroughs. But I really wanted to see what could happen if, for instance, knight to e8 happens. If, for instance, black tries to get rid of the bishop, which could be, I think, a good idea. As I said, we want to get rid of our bad bishop and continue the game with a very active light square bishop, because this activity of this bishop is perfectly fine. Now comes really a great tactic that Magnus has prepared here. We have now bishop to e7. After queen to e7, now 8x b5. After 8x b5, now comes b4. That's the stunner of this game, because you have to retreat with the knight and then to get bishop to f7. That's really the tactic. You will lose the exchange. We'll simply take the rook here on the a file. So that's why so far it's not possible here, as I said, to trade off the bishops. You could maybe even try something like knight to h5, but I think it gets even worse, because you get again a great tactic. Knight takes e5. After bishop to g5, now comes knight to f7. That's our main goal. The queen is attacked. After rook to f7, bishop to f7, king to f7, and now queen takes h5 with a check. You have to retreat, and now f4. Although black has two minor pieces for the rook, but I still think with this dominant pawn structure in the center, white has a comfortable game. We will always find a way to get these pawns rolling, even with g4 ideas, then maybe f5, f6 ideas. This knight can control also the center of the board. We can get this rook into the game. So as I said, trading off the dark square bishops is not possible, which is a great thing now for white, because as I said, black would love to simplify the position and simply get rid of the bad piece, but as I said, it's not possible. Rook to b8, we have 8x b5, 8x b5, and now rook to e1. This is now our normal idea. As I said, knight to f1, knight to e3, knight to d5. Here b4, Aryan Tari makes good progress here on the queen side, and now knight to c4. As I said, our main goal in the beginning, simply trading off more pieces and forcing black to continue the game with a bad bishop. It's simple as that. So knight takes c4, bishop to c4 was played, and now b takes c3, b takes c3, queen to c7, and now queen to c2. And now I think comes really the move that shows really the difference between Aryan Tari and Magnus Carlsen. When we evaluate all of our pieces on the board, we should always realize our bishop on d7 is perfectly fine. This bishop on c4 is also good, but when we notice that we have many pawns on light squares in the center, we shouldn't basically force a trade of light square bishop. We should, as I said, force a trade of dark square bishop, because this is now our bad piece. And I think now Aryan Tari makes a positional mistake with the move bishop to b5, and Magnus simply goes bishop takes b5, rook to b5, and now bishop to f6. And that was our goal, as I said in the beginning. Simply continuing the game against the bad bishop. Incredible positional game played by Magnus Carlsen. Bishop to f6, and now knight to d2. And you see now how good it is, how good white's position is. We can simply use this light squares in the center of the board. The c4 square is perfectly fine. The square d5 is perfectly fine. And whenever we cement, for instance, the knight on c4 or maybe on d5, there is no minor piece anymore on the board which can kick away this outposted knight. This knight on d5 or c4 will be the so-called octopus knight, this knight that cannot be kicked away by any minor piece. It cannot be kicked away with the pawn because you have advanced also your pawns. I've mentioned this strategy many times in my videos, but as I said, it was a cool thing in this game by Magnus Carlsen that he applied this from this early stage of the game, and now he gets his goal. His pieces are perfectly fine, although the material is equal, but this knight is simply so much better than the bishop here on f6. So queen to c6, queen to a4, creating the spinning idea. Here rook to b8, knight to c4, bishop to e7. Now g3, creating some breathing spaces for the king. Queen to c8, and now queen to d1. We have g6, king to g2. Here bishop to f8, queen to f3. So Magnus doesn't rush this position. He knows that he has a decisive advantage, that he has the better piece on the board. So it's time to improve first of the position of all of our pieces, and then to play on our natural idea, knight to e3 and knight to d5. First, getting a security, then it's time to strike. So rook to b3, rook to c1, queen to e6, now rook to a7, rook to b7, and now you see, even if black manages to simplify the position further and further, it still doesn't help him out, because still we have now this other rook into the game. h5 was played, and now rook to a8, king to g7, and now finally knight to e3, with preparations of course to play the move knight to d5. And you cannot prevent this idea because you don't have any more the light square bishop. So that's why I mentioned this idea of Aryan Tari to play the move bishop to b5, forcing a trade of light square bishop, keeps simply the light squares on this side of the board, or on black side of the board, simply unprotected. And now this outpost is a perfect idea of white. So rook to c7, we have knight to d5, rook to c8, we have rook to a7, rook to b8, and now h3, preventing maybe now a further simplification line here for black, because what we can notice now in Magnus Carlsen's position, that he has now really the pieces on the best squares on the board. I'm not sure where we could find really a better square for the queen, for the knight, for the rook. So that's why we shouldn't now allow our opponent to simplify the position. If the position is more and more simplified now, maybe without the queens on the board, maybe without the rooks on the board, this could be a drawish position. Now that's why h3, preventing this queen to g4 idea. Rook to d8, g4, h takes g4, h takes g4, rook to d7, and now rook to a8 again. We have f6, and now comes really a great move. Pause the video and try to find the best next move here for Magnus Carlsen. As usual, we say, test your might in chess. Try to see really a good progress, sort of. The evolution is winning here for black. It's not a move that we can say it's winning immediately for white, but as I said, find really a great attacking strategy here. Okay, the move by Magnus Carlsen was the move g5, simply creating further weaknesses in the position. And after f5, queen to h3, creating this very annoying pin on the queen. Here rook to f7 was played, and now rook to e8, attacking the queen. The problem is now you have to take basically the rook, and now comes queen to h6, rook to king to g8, and now queen to g6. Great attack here by Magnus Carlsen, and checkmate is basically unavoidable, because if you try here, for instance, bishop to g7, now comes again the stunner, knight to f6. You cannot take with a rook because you will lose the queen. If you move the king, you're getting checkmated. Here, if you try king to f8, then knight to e8, and here we can simply take another pawn. Here after bishop to f8, again queen to e6. If you cover, we can take another pawn, and it's of course a completely winning endgame here for white. So after queen to g6, here Aryan Tari tried king to h8, but now after knight to f6 in this position, Aryan Tari resigned. You have a double threat, of course. It's of course checkmate here on h7 or on g8, and the queen is also attacked. In order to prevent maybe a checkmate, you should play rook to g7, but then you lose the queen, and of course it's again a better position here for white. White is completely winning. So okay, great game. As I said, this was a game in which Magnus Carlsen didn't have inaccuracies, mistakes, or blunders. Perfect game, perfect Rui Lopez in this close style. Great performance by the world champion. Magnus Carlsen is now in the lead of the tournament. Alireza Firouzja is on second place as he lost the Armageddon game against Fabiano Caruana, but still has maybe good opportunities to win this tournament as he's only 1 point behind Magnus Carlsen. And what I've noticed about Alireza Firouzja's tournament now, this event here, that Alireza gained really, I'm not sure, 18 or 19 rating points in classical time format, and he is now, let me see that, sorry about that. Ratings, okay, we have, I hope you can see this. Let me try it out. Okay, let me see here. I hope you can watch this. I've noticed that I really want to show you. See, Firouzja has gained 18 rating points here, and he's now on the place 18 on the ranking list, and he is now in front of even Hikaru Nakamura. He's better than Veselin Topalov. Hare Krishna is here, Veji, Andreikin. So, as I said, here's a little bit behind Duda, Karyakin, Anand, Dominguez, Perez. So you see, maybe he can gain some more points in this tournament. Maybe he can get maybe 6-7 points, and will get maybe even in front of the legendary Vishy Anand. So incredible performance by Alireza Firouzja too. Maybe he will not win this tournament, but as I said, taking the second place would be also a great thing in a tournament where Fabiano Caruana has played, where Levon Aronian has played. So as I said, okay, this was the game of Magnus Carlsen, and I think it was so far a great tournament for us to see. We'll see now what will happen in continuation of the tournament. If you want to see more games from this event, check out my Altibox Norway Chess coverage. Here's the link. And if you want to see the best chess games of all time, check out my best chess games of all time series. Here's also the link. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and what to say, chess is the best, of course.